Welcome, demigods, mortals, and monsters. It's your friendly neighborhood demigod lover here to break down season 1 of the long-awaited Percy Jackson and the Olympians series. Unless this is your first time at the rodeo, you probably know that this show was adapted from the popular book franchise of the same name. You may also know that the Percy Jackson fandom can be a bit ecstatic. Welcome to my channel, I hope you stick around. We may not know what we're doing, but we sure have fun with it. Anyway, this show is adapting the Percy Jackson book series, which has 5 volumes with 1 season for each book. There are also a number of spin-off and sequel series that will hopefully be adapted someday, but for now we're focusing on just the original 5 books. Specifically Book 1, The Lightning Thief, also known as Season 1. Let's jump into it. Side note, you may have heard of the abominations known to some as the Percy Jackson movies. All you need to know is we don't talk about those. Let me tell you, seeing all these mainstream YouTubers reviewing Percy Jackson is such a strange juxtaposition. On the one hand, it's a dream come true seeing such a big interest of mine become so popular. On the other hand, I do feel somewhat possessive of this show, especially facing people who have never read the books. You can come in here as late in the game as you wish and say whatever you want, but just remember that you're not the one who's been waiting for this show for 3.5 years and praying for it since long before that. Still, no salt intended. This video is directed towards all Percy Jackson fans, whether they're familiar with the book, the show, or both. To be honest, if you have never read the books, you might come out of this review a little bit confused, but you're probably used to that by now. Welcome to camp, everyone. Let's get this party started. As with any good adaptation, they kept the general structure of the plot. Percy Jackson, a 12-year-old boy, introduces us to his world in a cryptic manner and with a dire warning. Stay away. We learn that he has always been different for reasons including ADHD and dyslexia, and has had a few instances of seeing otherworldly monsters, which have been dismissed by everyone around him, leading him to think he is crazy. He has a best friend named Grover and is bullied by a girl named Nancy Bobofit. During a field trip, after being attacked by a teacher named Mrs. Dodds, who spontaneously transformed into a monster, a series of events causes him to be expelled. As he arrives home, we meet his loving mother and his lazy, rude stepdad, whom he, to put it mildly, doesn't get along with. Percy and his mother go on a weekend trip which is crashed by Grover. He is revealed to be a satyr, half human, half goat. Then it's crashed by a monster. Percy loses his mom in the ensuing chaos before killing said monster because he's a badass. He is welcomed to Camp Half-Blood, a safe haven for the children of Greek gods and humans, where they learn how to fight monsters and survive encounters with them in the real world. Percy meets the other members of the character cast. A prickly but smart girl named Annabeth, the daughter of Athena, a friendly older boy named Luke, the son of Hermes, a violent bully named Clarice, the daughter of Ares, the camp director and eternally annoyed god of wine, Mr. D, and Chiron, Percy's former teacher but taller. And also a horse. Percy adapts to life at camp, soaks Clarice in toilet water, the works, until Annabeth sets him up to fight Clarice during a capture the flag game. The game ends with Percy being claimed by Poseidon, the god of the seas. This means that he was born in violation of a pact between Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, aka the Big Three, not to father any demigod children. He is quickly thrown into a quest to save the world from war by finding the sky god Zeus's stolen master lightning bolt. He receives a prophecy from the masterfully creepified Oracle of Delphi, and leaves for the underworld with Annabeth and Grover to find his mom, who has been there since the monster attack, and the bolt, which is suspected to have been stolen by Hades. They get attacked by Furies on a bus, cause some chaos, encounter and defeat Medusa, cause some impertinent chaos, get attacked by Echidna and the Chimera, and cause some fugitive-style chaos. They eventually meet Ares, the god of war, who offers to help them get to the underworld if they help him get his shield, which he left inside an amusement park rigged by Hephaestus. Percy and Annabeth succeed at this little mini-quest, and Ares rewards them by giving Percy a backpack. The gang hangs with abused animals all the way to Vegas. Okay, that was a lot of exposition. You good? In Vegas, they stay at the time-warping Lotus Hotel before realizing something isn't right and booking it all the way to a waterbed shop owned by a dude named Crusty. Percy learns more about his friends through the journey, namely Annabeth's difficult relationship with her father and stepmother and Grover's desire to find Pan, the missing god of the wild. He also learns that Grover has a complicated history as the protector of Luke, Annabeth, and a girl named Thalia, who almost ended up dead while under Grover's protection and is now a tree. In the underworld, they encounter Chiron and Cerberus, whom Annabeth tames using the tricks she did with the dog she had when she was little. They also encounter the entrance to Tartarus, the residence of the defeated Titan Lord Kronos, who was chopped into pieces by his kids after he ate them. Okay, another exposition break. Also gross. Just as their journey seems to be reaching an end, they find the Master Bolt in the backpack that Ares gave Percy and realize that Hades isn't the culprit. He simply wants his Helm of Darkness, which has also been stolen. Forced to return to the mortal world without his mother, Percy fights Ares for the helm and the bolt and wins. This is because of how far he's come and how he's learned to embrace his lineage as the son of Poseidon despite everything. Also, because he's a badass. Percy goes to Olympus, located at the top of the Empire State Building, returns the bolt, stops the war, and has a tense and imperfect conversation with a father that he's never met. Percy walks away from this conversation understanding that the gods aren't perfect, but able to see that they are trying in their own ways. Also knowing that Kronos might be trying to take over the world again. Yay! As Percy returns to camp and things come to a close, Luke lures Percy into the forest and reveals his true colors as an agent of Kronos, before leaving camp to continue his mission to bring back the Titan Lord's rule. Percy's mom is returned home, Percy's stepdad gets what's coming to him, and Percy himself decides, after some deliberation, to live with his mother in New York instead of staying at camp year-round. Percy knows that the real world is where the monsters are, but he's ready to face them. Annabeth comes to a similar conclusion as she leaves camp to live with her dad. Grover, meanwhile, begins his search for Pan. As all three members of the trio depart on their own journeys, it becomes clear that their demigod troubles are only beginning. Man, that story's longer than I remember. The biggest change in the plot is how the book was divided into episodes. They clearly wanted each episode to feel like its own story within the larger story of Season 1, establishing a signature theme and character for each episode, often relating to a specific myth or location and mythology. This also means that the signature character from every episode is developed and unique, and that certain parts of the original story are shortened or lengthened. Though this is a logical change to make between show and book, it came with a lot of creativity on the writer's part, showing a different side to these characters and introducing characters that don't appear until significantly later in the book series. Though I am somewhat worried that they might run out of characters to introduce, they seem to be doing a good job blending new characters and ideas with the ones from the source material, so for now, it's probably wise to simply hope that'll continue. Another change that's been remarked is that in the book, Percy had time to adjust to life at camp before being thrust into his quest. He gets used to living in the Hermes cabin, then the Poseidon cabin. He gets used to how people treat him differently after they learn he's the son of Poseidon. He gets used to sword fighting with Luke, learning about mythology with Annabeth, and having an adversarial relationship with Clarice. I've heard some complaints about this change, but it's also one of the most common and understandable book-to-screen changes there is, so I won't complain, even if it was nice to see him bonding with Luke and Annabeth at camp in the book. There were other changes made to the plot, namely in the book, the battle with Clarice turned into a battle with a hellhound. They also shortened the scene with Chiron, which originally had a lot more dialogue and included one of the funniest jokes in the book about drowning in a bathtub. The Asphodel scene was a new addition, as was Alecto's offer to Annabeth. There's probably a whole list to be made of which scenes were added or removed in this adaptation, but there's nothing major to be said there, and I don't have that many brain cells, so we're gonna move on. The show established the world of the gods and mythical creatures as distinct from the world of humans, but makes it clear that they are still connected. Places like Camp Half-Blood are referred to as being on the other side of the mist, but as anyone except for movie fans knows, the mist isn't physical. The mythical world and the real one exist together, and the show really did a good job showing how mythological beings influence the real world in ways that mortals can't see, like through Hephaestus' amusement park and the monster Percy sees at the beginning. Say that 10 times fast. Camp is a home run in this regard. It also combines nature with human-made structures in a way that perfectly matches the image I had from the books. The cabins, the pavilion, and the various training locations did so much for world building. Plus, if the no killing, no maiming rule, and really the whole capture the flag scene, doesn't give you Percy Jackson vibes, I don't know what will. My one critique in this category is that I don't love the idea of a god bringing so much attention to himself and even name-dropping demigods while he's hanging out with mortals. I guess the rules do get a little wonky in the Lotus Hotel. It's worth pointing out that this is all coming from the perspective of someone who has memorized every single detail about the Percy Jackson world as it was in the books, and I have no idea how they did introducing the world of demigods to newcomers. So if any newcomers to the series are watching this video, please feel free to comment how you think they did here. I promise not to attack you. The title character of Percy Jackson and the Olympians has always been sassy, brave, and deferent to authority, a spirit that the adaptation lives up to. His lines, whether they be adorkable, clever, awkward, serious, or cool, have an obvious Percy quality to them. This is only helped by the fact that Walker Scobell does a splendid job bringing him to life. I would definitely say that Percy is the main character who is the most similar to his book counterpart, which is automatically a pretty good sign. He spends most of the story protective of his mom, resentful of his dad, and confused by the mythological world, but eventually accepts his identity as a demigod and becomes powerful enough to go head to head with the god of war after embracing the seas as part of who he is. The show even established the deep personal loyalty that's a key part of who he is in the books. With both the Chimera and Hephaestus's trap, Percy willingly sacrifices his life so that his friends won't have to. All in all, the lovable, somewhat unhinged personality that makes Percy so popular with book fans comes across fantastically in this adaptation. My main criticism of Percy in the show isn't even about him, but about a specific obstacle in his life. Gabe. Simply put, Gabe isn't mean enough. I addressed this in my first review, but this character needs to be more intimidating. Book Gabe was abusive. This guy... Well, let's go over what happens in his 2 scenes in episode 1. He snidely welcomes Percy home and insists that it's his roof, therefore his rules, to which Percy protests that Gabe doesn't work. Gabe dismissively says that Percy couldn't understand because he's a kid. When Sally calls him into the room, he shows off his rude laziness and awful manners. She warns him not to test her patience, and they get into an argument about Gabe's favorite sandwich place. Sally meets him with sass and boldness, bringing him down a level and having him ask nicely for hot peppers on his sandwich. Without even thinking twice, she stands up to him and comes out of the argument with the upper hand. It's not that it's impossible for these interactions to manifest in a world where Gabe is abusive, but considering how little screen time he has, it's important to make every minute count. Instead, his minimal appearances double down on how lazy and unfazed he is. It's clear that the show version of Gabe isn't portrayed as abusive or intimidating. Instead of meeting him with fear, Percy meets him with annoyance and Sally meets him with confrontation. Percy is a kid who comes from multiple hardships to find a supportive chosen family in Camp Half-Blood. That's why he comes across as so relatable and why the books felt like a safe haven for many readers from the struggles of their own lives. Therefore, the characters' pasts and which aspects of those pasts you choose to adapt sends a message. In a way, it's like Disney is telling viewers, you're ADHD, dyslexic, you feel different from everyone else, you've got low grades, you come from a poor family, you're bullied by other kids. That's okay. You have a place at Camp Half-Blood just like when you read the books. We see you. You've been abused by a parental figure? Sorry, we don't have a place for you because we're a bunch of greedy hogs, and showing you that your pain and your experiences matter and that there's a place for you at camp isn't as important to us as preserving the squeaky clean image we use to gain as much profit as possible. You could argue that I'm being too harsh, but taking away this element of Percy's story that was explicitly mentioned in the book feels like such a rude you moment. Think about the message it sends to people who relate to this element of Percy's life and who previously felt seen by his story because of that. Now, it may be impossible to know for sure who was responsible for this choice, but if you haven't noticed, I fault Disney higher-ups. We know that Disney has a habit of shaving down any topics in their films and shows that might cause them to lose money, such as LGBTQIA+ topics that would deter bigoted viewers. By the same token, it makes sense that they would avoid any topics that might grant Percy Jackson a more mature rating and deter younger children. On the other hand, I don't see what motive Rick Riordan or anyone else committed to the Percy Jackson story would have to make this change. However, just because this isn't a surprising move for Disney to make, doesn't mean I'm cool with it. Kids in Percy's situation deserve to feel represented, no matter what elements of his story they relate to. Remember, Disney, our fandom bullied you relentlessly until you agreed to adapt Percy Jackson. You want to stay on our good side. I have to say that when it comes to Annabeth, I appreciate most of the changes that were made between book and show. The biggest change was to Annabeth's general disposition and attitude. I wouldn't say that I dislike the book character by any means, but it's true that she has quite a few bossy and just pointlessly rude moments with Percy, this is not only toned down in the adaptation, but most of it is confined to a single episode. Their overall dynamic is still the same, with her sometimes making fun of him in a lighthearted, sassy way, but she doesn't put nearly as much energy into being annoyed with him. It's less central to their friendship, which is a wise move. Had Annabeth been as prickly as she was in the books, she would have been pretty hated by a lot of people, and she deserves better than that. Hand in hand with toning down her difficult exterior, her vulnerable side came to light far earlier on. In my opinion, this offers a more holistic view of Annabeth, allowing her to be both a genius and a realistic person with flaws. It leaves more room for character development because the audience has a clearer sense of who she is and what motivates her sooner than they do in the book. Furthermore, Leah Jeffries' acting does a surreal job bringing both the tough and emotional sides of the character to life. The book character also had a tendency to let her need for glory cloud her judgment. Glory is still a potent weakness of the show character, but she's more contained. In the book, whenever someone new comes to camp, she insists powerfully that they must be the one because she wants a quest so badly, which leads her to actively work to heal Percy after the Minotaur battle, which in turn leads to her infamous line,
"You drool when you sleep."
In the show, Annabeth does what you'd expect an Athena kid to do. Calmly monitor Percy for a sign that he's the one, then set him up to prove it. This side of the show character comes into play again in episode 3, when she realizes Medusa's identity instantly, which she doesn't in the book, and refuses to be swayed by Alecto's words about her glory and formidability. Overall, I wouldn't say this is a positive or negative change, it's just a difference between two versions of Annabeth. That being said, there is one negative change that was made to Annabeth's character in the show, and at the risk of repeating myself, Disney needs to let things get real. They really oversimplified her relationship with her dad. The big mouth seems a-okay with cartoonishly evil step-parents and with good parents who have flaws, but Dr. Chase is neither of those things. In the book, his primary flaw is loving his work more than his daughter. Things get worse after his marriage to a mortal woman and the birth of his fully mortal kids, but even before remarrying, his bond with Annabeth is challenged because he doesn't spend a lot of time with her. He just doesn't want to be a father, and his daughter is very aware of this. They have some genuinely sweet moments together, but they're rather uncommon, and Dr. Chase has a lot of work to do as a father. Much like Gabe, this might have felt too mature and thus was not allowed in the show. I'm not surprised, just disappointed and plain sad to see things simplified that way. The way they portrayed Grover's personality was a slam dunk. I can't even count the number of times, especially in the first few episodes, when the beautiful screenwriting and Ariane Simhadri's talent combined to make it seem like this guy just fell right out of the books. His lines are amazing in both content and delivery, and every second that Grover is on screen just radiates the silly, sweet energy that he's known for. His friendship with Percy is the perfect example of a goofball duo whose charming, humorous interactions only deepen their bond. The main adaptation difference I noticed about Grover is that they focused more on his search for Pan and less on his checkered history as a protector. The books explain that satyrs need to succeed as protectors in order to get their licenses to search for Pan, but without the presence of that connection in the show, Grover's protector role takes a back seat. His love and enthusiasm for the natural world is amazing to watch, but I'm not a big fan of the half-baked way his past was discussed. They included his low confidence as a protector, but never really resolved it. He has the same backstory as in the book, but with less accountability. This is reflected in the fact that even though Grover sees himself as a failed protector, the show doesn't want you to think that there was anything he could have done differently. In the book, the Minotaur fight results in Grover losing consciousness, and Percy ends up having to drag him into camp. The book also clarifies that the attacks Thalia faced all those years ago wouldn't have been a problem if Grover had led the group to camp more quickly and not gotten lost. I love Grover, but you can see why he views the quest as a chance to prove himself after his past blunders. The show character doesn't have anything to prove. While he laments that if he had acted differently, Percy's mom wouldn't have been taken, it's unclear what he thinks he could have done differently. The same issue applies to Thalia's sacrifice. This dryad even flat out tells Grover that he's just too hard on himself, which to me implies that Grover's insecurities largely in his head and that no one else thinks he needs to prove he's a good protector. Also, I don't really understand the point of this scene.
Thalia, Luke, and Annabeth had a satyr protector. That was you. Why didn't you tell me?
It never comes up again and doesn't significantly affect Percy and Grover's dynamics, so Why does it exist? His mistakes as a protector are never officially resolved, and he never moves on from them. It isn't even clear if he actually failed or if he just needs to stop being tough on himself. Admittedly, I do like how he disobeys orders to tell Percy the truth about his mom. That really shows you who he is as a friend. Luke was so convincing as the friendly, reassuring nice guy that I'm almost flabbergasted at how good his villain scene is. If I were watching the series without having read the books, I never would have suspected Luke as a traitor. His interactions with Annabeth and his obvious soft spot for her show such a unique dynamic. As a book fan, they're also heartbreaking to watch. Even their most surface level interactions feel incredibly layered, and every moment when he mentions her reveals so much depth. Charlie Bushnell brings the character's relaxed, welcoming persona to life so effectively, only to switch into an amazing antagonist in his final scene. Speaking of Luke's betrayal, I love how much emotion they packed into it. His monologue, Percy's complete terror, and the soft yet forceful reactions that Luke and Annabeth have as they look at each other for what is the millionth, but in many ways the first time, create something special. I would like to add, unfortunately, that I don't like how much they dived into Luke's backstory in episode 6. No two ways about it, it's just too early. You need to have something powerful to reveal in season 5 when you're adapting The Last Olympian in order for his redemption to hit the notes that it needs to. I really hope that the writers are being more careful about this than they seem to be. Moving on to our not-so-friendly neighborhood bully, Clarice is mostly the same as her book counterpart, though she feels a lot more low-key. In the book, she welcomes the opportunity to personally pick a fight with anyone she sees as a threat. In the show, she's equally scary, but in a quieter, subtler way, letting her siblings do some of the actual beating up so she can focus on making sure her victims know not to get on her bad side again. I don't know if I would call this a necessary change, but it's not a bad one. Her real chance to shine comes in the capture the flag scene. Her lines and the activation of her spear are both good, but that laugh as she's fighting Percy has the perfect Clarice written all over it. Well done, Dior Goodjohn. I can't wait to see where you and the writers take this character in season 2. When it comes to the roster of side characters, I'd say that Chiron bears the most similarity to his book counterpart. In both forms, the character has a stern but caring fatherly persona, being the understanding, sympathetic mentor that everyone at Camp Half-Blood needs. I particularly like his last scene just before Percy leaves camp.
When Luke explained why he planned to take down Olympus, part of it made sense to you, didn't it?
Despite his personally harrowing relationship with Kronos, he doesn't judge Percy for relating to Luke and his desire to take down the gods. He knows that the demigods he trains are often put in vastly unfair situations. Unlike the gods and most other immortals, he understands and accepts that taking down Olympus might make sense to them, and he's willing to confront that reality with them. Just because he knows that life under Titan rule would be real bad doesn't mean he can expect these kids whose lives have been turned upside down by the gods to believe that. This all may just sound like basic empathy, but it's a pretty rare thing to see from immortals in this universe, and Glyn Turman really communicates Chiron's unique patience and understanding. He meets his students with kindness even when it comes to this almost taboo topic, and it's so refreshing to see. He also has some pretty humorous moments with Mr. D. No Lightning Thief review is complete without taking a moment to respect the queen among women, above the gods themselves, mother of Perseus, Sally Jackson. Her scenes throughout the entire series are golden. I love the added detail that she tells Percy stories about Greek mythology, and the implication that she does so to prepare him for life as a demigod. There's a conversation between Percy and Annabeth in episode 5, wherein Percy says that his mom was trying to keep him away from the mythological world, and Annabeth suggests that she might have been trying to prepare him so that he wouldn't be like all of them. Turns out, the daughter of Athena was spot on. What a shock. Throughout the flashbacks, we witness Percy's mother struggling to prepare her son for life as a demigod, while also trying to keep him far enough away from it that he knows who he is before he can be corrupted by the gods and their world. It's wonderful to see her provided with more depth than she had in the books, and watch her struggle to raise her half-blood son. Virginia Cull is a master of her craft, giving her character such a powerful emotional presence and really demonstrating what an incredible person Sally Jackson is. In the the books, as in the show, there's enormous variation in the gods' personalities and dispositions. However, in the books, all of them except for Hestia are united in one simple fact. They're assholes. Even when the more sympathetic ones like Hades or the more likable ones like Artemis have their commendable moments, they're still kind of hated in a sense because the gods are just horrible. They're absentee parents who only interact with their kids to have them risk their lives and get beat up by monsters to do their bidding. They curse innocent people for disrespecting their oh so precious authority, and some can charitably be described as inconsistent when it comes to the consent of their mortal companions. Even the best of them have some major oofs, like kidnapping their wives or cursing people who don't deserve it. That reality is a crucial part of the end of the series. Percy turns down the greatest offer of all to make things better for demigods, because he knows that the side he's been fighting for all this time is far from right. Let's see how much each of the gods who appear in the show line up with this characterization. Ares is fairly in line with this logic, being violent, manipulative, and willing to kill 3 children at a moment's notice simply because he finds them annoying. He's completely full of himself, laughing his head off at the idea that a demigod could beat him in a fight. Well done, Adam Copeland. He lies to the trio about getting them to the underworld for the sake of being a jerk, and that's not even accounting for the fact that he tried to cause a civil war between his family knowing that many innocent humans would die. He's in line with how the gods are supposed to be, which is to say, awful. Which makes sense since he's one of the more disliked gods in the pantheon. Then there's Hephaestus, who isn't in The Lightning Thief at all. When he does appear much later in the book series, he mostly seems gruff and solitary, with poor social skills due to the abundance of time he spends around machines and the lack of time he spends around living beings. He encourages the gang to stay away from a powerful but crooked inventor for their own good, but doesn't seem to care much what happens to them or what their circumstances are on account of being a god. In the show, Annabeth expresses to him how wrong it is that demigods are made to fight for glory and ignore everything else. He feels a twinge of sympathy for her, knowing how awful his family can be, and admits that not all gods like the status quo. As a result, he frees Percy from his trap. I don't necessarily think this scene made him too sympathetic. He would, after all, have to be pretty cruel to set this trap in the first place. And Annabeth did hit a nerve. Timothy Omundson portrays Hephaestus as a smart, frank being who isn't as small as he looks, but who is also capable of real sympathy towards someone much smaller than him. It's great, though I caution the writers to keep an eye on how they write him in the future. He is still a god. Moving on to Hermes, I do actually think they went too far with him. In both the books and the show, Hermes deeply wants to mend his bond with Luke, but I don't see how that translates to sharing your entire history with your son with 2 strangers. Just because Percy and Annabeth happen to know Luke doesn't automatically mean it makes sense for him to open this can of worms with them. I just can't imagine a god being that vulnerable for no reason. If he wanted to keep them in the Lotus Hotel to make their quest fail, he could have distracted them with literally anything that the Lotus Hotel has to offer. Also remember, they'll have to revisit Hermes and Luke's relationship in season 5, and they'll need Hermes to be even more vulnerable and emotional when they do. In the original, their difficult relationship was hinted at in the 2nd book, but was not explained until the 5th, so going in so deep so early is unwise. I like the bitter, detached energy that Lin-Manuel Miranda brings to the character, but I still think they kind of screwed this one up overall. As for Mr. D, there are very few times when you'll hear this, but it is refreshing how much of a jerk this guy is. After the boringness of the Mr. D from the movies, seeing this almost cartoonishly grumpy, constantly frustrated, hilarious interpretation of the character is a real treat. It's also exactly how I imagined him, and honestly, it's kind of stupid how much I laughed at his age-old quip of getting Percy's name wrong. Jason Mantzoukas' voice and acting are both perfect for this character, and while I initially struggled to separate his role in Percy Jackson from his role in The Good Place, his excellence in the part made it easier. Show fans who've never read the books probably hate this guy to pieces, but to me, that's all the more proof they did the character justice. Brace yourselves, folks. You haven't seen the last of the wine dude, and it'll be a while before you start to like him. And now for the big 3. I think you all know how I feel about the show version of Hades, so all I'm gonna say is that it failed. When it comes to both the individual character and his place among the gods, he needs to be more intimidating. I didn't think I would ever say this, But Hades should take notes from Zeus. Zeus is amazingly terrifying. Watching him lecture Percy about how things are supposed to work between gods and demigods and putting him in his place, or trying to, was fantastic. Lance Reddick, who sadly left the world too soon, was perfect in this role. You can tell that he and the writers were really on the same page, portraying Zeus as a kind of monster. He's scary, powerful, and ready to murder Percy the moment he tests his patience. There's something that just works about Zeus being not only volatile, but also a keen representation of the status quo. He spends a good portion of his lines explaining to Percy that he is far more powerful than him and has no interest in treating him as an equal. That makes him the perfect authority figure for Percy to defy. My rating of the show's Poseidon depends heavily on the scene. The good news is that the scenes where Poseidon is actually present give him a book-accurate personality. He comes across as someone who cares for his son, but doesn't know how to talk to him and isn't willing to be vulnerable to connect with him. He is nicer than his book counterpart, but still feels like the same character. Toby Steffens imbues him with a sense of kindness, but also a sense of distance that really make him feel like both a god and Percy's father. On the other hand, episodes 4 and 5 both unfortunately end with a scene where a water nymph appears to Percy and passes on a message from Poseidon. Both times, this message is something along the lines of, "He loves you, he's proud of you, and he's found it incredibly painful to watch you suffer and feel powerless to help." Even though it's communicated indirectly, this just doesn't feel like the kind of thing any god would say to their kid. The gods just aren't like that. Poseidon is no exception. In the books, there are rare occasions of a godly parent expressing pride in or showing affection towards their kid, but it's typically only in response to some extraordinary feat because the gods mostly see their children as extensions of their own egos. I know that sounds horrible, but it's the truth. Once again, I won't say that I'm surprised that a Disney show would try to avoid that kind of reality, but I still don't like it. I also don't like how Hermes and Poseidon make it seem like the reason the gods aren't in their kids' lives is because they're trying to be good parents. One, it is completely ludicrous to suggest that the best that an all-powerful being can do for their 12-year-old is send them on deadly missions that may very well traumatize them for life just to save themselves and never interact with them outside of said deadly mission. 2, stop trying to make the gods seem nicer than they are. Let them be messed up. They are supposed to be messed up. Watch yourselves, Disney. After shutting down Nimona, you are on thin ice. So what we've just seen is that most of the gods are characterized pretty well, but the two gods who primarily appear in season 1 as parents of the main characters had quite a few bumps in the road. There's some work to be done in regards to the gods' portrayal as parents, and I really hope that Disney lets things get as dark as they need to. For the dozenth time, Disney, I'm watching you. In the meantime, on a totally unrelated note, you all just remember that bullying is okay when it's done to a multi-million-dollar company. For legal purposes, I must specify that I'm kidding. The monsters are one category where the show vastly improved upon the source material, hands down. The idea of monsters representing real people or types of people who make the lives of young demigods more difficult was present in the book, hence Annabeth's famous line, "The real world is where the monsters are," but the show leans much more heavily on that angle. Not only does it have a more ambiguous interpretation of what a monster is, but the literal monsters feel more real. To start, neither Medusa nor Echidna had anything even approximating these monologues in the book. Book Medusa gives off more of a sweet old lady vibe than anything else, hence the nickname Auntie M, and her most manipulative lines consist of a single paragraph telling her story in a vague but not particularly interesting way. There's a visible change in her behavior for the worse when she realizes that Annabeth is Athena's daughter. This Medusa manipulates the crap out of both the characters and the audience, initially appearing quite sympathetic. She comes to the trio's rescue by intimidating Alecto, whom she refers to as a bully, and offers them a meal. Though her scene is tinged by a certain creepiness, she tells her story in a way that Annabeth seems to relate to, though she'd never admit it. She has a degree of calmness and patience that you couldn't expect from a villain. Even after giving up on Annabeth, she has such an air of kindness towards Percy, before you realize that she's suggesting murder anyway.
I could help you remove them from the equation.
This makes her all the more creepy when her evil side is revealed, and frames her as a more challenging threat because it's much harder for both the heroes and the audience to identify her as a threat. Whereas in the book, both the reader and Annabeth found themselves screaming, "Get away from this woman at all costs!" Echidna's villainy is never hidden from the audience, but her monologue is still fascinating. As I discussed in my episode 4 review, it frames her as the enemy of the
disruptive, violent
children of the gods, masterfully blending demigods with kids who have been labeled that way in the past. In the same spirit, it puts the idea of Percy, Annabeth, and Grover having to travel across the country without any adults into both magical and mortal contexts. When Echidna says,
"Your parents aren't here, are they?"
she is talking about the gods, and she's also talking about neglectful parents who would have their preteens travel across the country by themselves. Though I've seen the complaint floating around that her monologue was pointless, I think it makes her far superior to the book character, who appeared too briefly to really have a personality. And let's be honest, someone as powerful as the mother of monsters does merit that amount of attention. Alecto doesn't have her own episode, but is similarly revamped, going from not really having enough page time for her personality to taking on this child-hating, cold, sober persona, putting demigods back in their place. Her line,
"Some children must learn the hard way,"
once again demonstrates both who demigods are in Percy Jackson and who she is in opposition to them. Similar to Echidna, it makes her both a fictional villain and a real monster. Then there's Crusty, who's just crusty. This segment is best exemplified not by my own words, but by the following.
You could make an appointment to see Mr. Kane. He's really good
I
about
was
talking
thinking
to
more like shoving Nancy in the nearest dumpster.
Oh,
I have a job. What does it look like I'm doing right now?
Losing at imaginary poker?
Something's coming.
Grover.
And I know, that sounds really bad.
Grover.
But the important thing is not to panic. I'm not panicking.
Grover?
Right? I'm also definitely not panicking. I feel very good about how we're doing so far.
Grover!
What?
Grover, why is there half a goat in your pants?
He is brutal. He is relentless.
He's wearing underpants.
Mr. D, this is Percy Jackson.
Yeah, Grover. I heard him the first time.
But did you?
I've never seen a minotaur crush a human to death, but I assume that they'd get really squishy or something, or like an old banana, maybe.
When it's time, he's gonna be ready. I know it.
She fought valiantly, and she met a hero's fate.
She met a pinecone's fate.
Oh dear, when the team's getting grumpy, the trick to getting through it is singing this
Dude,
song.
what are you doing?
They will see this as impertinent.
I am impertinent. Be right down, just going to the potty.
Don't you even try to tell me not to be weird about this.
I didn't say anything.
I can feel you thinking it. And I feel a lot better about having stolen his keys.
Exactly. Wait, what? Hermes drives a cab?
And left us a note.
How do we know that's for us? Nice. You're Procrustes.
Crusty, please.
And much more. Thank the gods Disney Plus is giving this show the attention and quality it deserves. The computer animation of every magical creature and event was amazing. Mrs. Dodds' transformation into a monster looked so natural, and her disintegration not only looked cool, but was a perfect introduction to how monsters bite the dust. The Minotaur scene was largely reliant on lighting and really knew how to use that to its advantage to make something both unknown and scary. The editing of Chiron in full centaur form looks both magnificent and completely natural. Grover's legs and horns are also very natural and realistic looking. I love how they're present enough that you never forget they're there, but natural enough that they're not distracting. Same thing goes for the other satyrs. Medusa looks greatly creepy, especially from a distance. The Chimera could have been better. It kind of looks more like a statue than a living creature. Hephaestus's trap turning Percy to gold was beautifully sad, as was the awesomely creative animation of his own story. The design of the underworld with its jagged rocks, dark air, upside-down palace, and fields full of soulless-looking spirits tied down by regret correspond perfectly to a twisted version of the world above. It's full of death rather than life. I adore how Olympus is both a bright, regal kingdom and the terrifying otherworld where the tyrannical king of the gods resides. The glow of Percy's sword and how it sometimes vibrates in pen form really helps it to feel like a magical object. And this section is starting to feel more like a list. A very cool list, admittedly. So I'm like 80% sure that Bear McCreary and Sparks and Shadows are just Apollo in disguise, because this soundtrack is beyond words amazing. Every single song slaps. My personal favorite is The Tunnel of Love, which played in episode 5 inside the amusement park ride. It's sad and mysterious, but it has this subtle undertone of hope and really takes the scene from good to great. I also like the final song, The Sea Does Not Like to Be Restrained, which plays near the end of the last episode. I absolutely adore how it picks up during the trio's goodbye hug, and that moment never fails to make me emotional no matter how many times I listen to it. Hades' theme, entitled Lord of the Dead, was also impressive, perfectly channeling a constantly decaying world and its all-powerful ruler. The end of the Fields of Asphodel song, which played as Annabeth escaped the underworld, was beautiful. Camp Half-Blood's theme song and its mixture of ancient wonder and action are an obvious success. And of course, who doesn't love the Percy Jackson and the Olympians theme song, as well as the epic animation that accompanies it, which to me has always felt like a you're welcome gift for a job well done. Feels like a pretty good note to end things on. How do you all feel about the Percy Jackson series? Is it everything you hoped for? As far as I'm concerned, this series is a huge success, and I'm so pumped for season 2. The majority of the changes that were made make sense and even improve upon the source material, even if there are some odd choices mixed in there. The characters, the plot, and everything else involved work together to create a series that is just as familiar as it is unique, welcoming new and old campers from everywhere to come and be a part of this journey with Percy and his friends. With that, I would like to thank you all so much for watching my season 1 review. I will most certainly regret how long it is, so I appreciate if you stuck around through the whole thing. Now that this is done, my focus is shifting to a video discussing the Annabeth Chase casting backlash, which might be a bit of a wait due to the importance of giving this topic the time and attention it deserves. However, I am aware that upload gaps are kind of stabbing my channel to death right now, so rest assured that I plan to fill the void with plenty of edits and chaotic clip compilations, both from season 1. If you have any specific suggestions for either of these, feel free to comment below. With that, have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
It is a success of the Percy Jackson Black film and the blockbuster. We don't talk about the movies. Anyone with basic everything. This is not a reboot of the movies. We don't talk about the movies. The movies are bad.